Hi everyone, welcome to the community classroom. This is Dr. Tracy McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator, and we are going to quickly cover who is covered in HR 40. Now, we have discussed this before, but there are, of course, new national discussions going on related to HR 40, and there are hearings going on, and so there's a little bit of confusion about who is actually covered based upon HR 40 and who is covered related to Senator Booker's companion bill. And so there are a number of individuals who are identifying based upon a number of ethnicities. And so we've already addressed this in the discussion about HR 40, about how exclusive it is. And so we are just going to go over some of the categories of people in terms of how people are identifying who would normally be under that quote-unquote African American umbrella, but they are identifying distinct from that, and that actually has bearing on the extent to which they are being considered in terms of HR 40. And so we're going to look at who is actually on the table with respect to HR 40. Now, there are a couple of things to keep in mind about HR 41 is it is very exclusive. The other thing is that that's beneficial, and then it can also be a liability depending on how you look at it. So originally when we discussed HR 40, when we've had discussions about reparations, it has included everyone who would be normally under that African American umbrella. But people are becoming very, very vocal about not identifying as African American. And this does have impact related to the extent to which they have standing related to HR 40 and the companion bill that is in the Senate. And so let's just go over quickly who is not actually covered based upon HR 40 and the identities that people may or may not be claiming. And so first of all, it's important to note that American Indians / Aborigines are not covered in HR 40. And so what the expectation would be legally based upon the law would be that those individuals would seek justice based upon treaties. Now, of course, people are going to say what treaties, and the treaties have been violated. However, if you are familiar with Indian law, you know that that's what you have to focus on is those Indian treaties with respect to that major reparations. And again, HR 40 just simply does not cover this group. We're going to look at some options in terms of dealing with the issue of slavery and Indian slavery for those who don't identify as African American in just a second. The other group that may not be covered, depending on how they are understanding themselves or how they want to present themselves, are individuals who are identifying as non-African Hebrews. And so individuals who are identifying as Hebrews but indigenous to the Americas, those individuals are not covered in terms of HR 40. And also individuals who are African but who are considered non-Black Africans, those individuals would also not be covered based upon the language of HR 40. Also, individuals who are identified as quote-unquote Black but not African descended. And then you have, there's an assertion that 98% of African Americans are not African. Those individuals also would not be included because that's just not a part of the language of HR 40. And people need to understand that the language of law is very, very important. And so when those documents were created, they were strategically created to include and exclude. And so what might be happening is when you have all of these, people, such large numbers now coming out saying that they don't identify as African American, what it does is it lowers the number of people that Congress or the Senate that they have to actually consider in terms of reparations. And so it actually may serve as a benefit for those who identify as African American because there will be fewer people to consider, and so therefore it may seem more possible in the eyes of the legislators to actually produce something that is viable. Now again, HR 40 is very exclusionary, and so what individuals might want to do, they might want to start thinking about doing a few things. One option is to approach Congressional Black Caucus to ask Congressional Black Caucus to either restructure HR 40 so that it is more inclusive in terms of what would be considered darker skinned Indians and Aboriginal people. That's one option. Another option would be to approach the Native American Congressional Caucus to see if they can create yet another companion bill that is related to HR 40 that includes Indigenous people. And another option is to approach the Congressional Hispanic Caucus to see if they might be able to do something similar. Now, another option is to really look at the treaties that cover people to see if reparations has already been afforded, because that also is going to be an issue, because that's what's going to be presented. That will be a defensive argument that is offered, is that repair or restoration has already been made with respect to treaties. And so people need to understand how they are identifying and the implications of those identifications. And so if people actually are Indian, then there are treaties to cover the various Indian groups. If individuals don't fall under the treaties, but they do not identify as African American or African descendant, then the other options are on the table. Because at the present time, the way HR 40 is written and the way the companion bill is written, it is really exclusionary, and it really applies to those individuals who are African descended. And what's going to happen is, in terms of this African descendancy, is you can look at the census. Basically, you have a time period where individuals were not on the census, and then they suddenly appeared on the census. And so those individuals would likely be the individuals who would be considered. So they weren't on the census before in terms of those ancestors. They were included in the numbers for enslaved persons, and then suddenly they appeared in the next census as free people. And so hopefully this information is helpful. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care and see you soon.